He was pronounced dead just an hour after sunrise, with the official cause of death said to be a stroke, followed by heart failure. At age 88, he was one of the oldest popes in the history of the Roman Catholic Church, but his reign had been about average length at almost exactly 12 years. Much was made of the fact that one of Francis's very last official duties was an Easter Sunday meeting with Vice President J.D. Vance. Given the apparent mutual antipathy between these two men, there were all of these memes about how Vance had either killed the Pope or the meeting had gone so poorly that Francis had decided he didn't want to live anymore. Over on this continent, most of us learned of the Pope's passing in the late evening. It was just 10:30 p.m. in my time zone, but for most other people, it was past midnight. It was obviously a huge news event and prompted a great deal of coverage and analysis in the media, mostly reflecting on the legacy of Francis's reign and the state of Catholicism in general. Pope Francis, I think it is fair to say, was broadly well-liked and respected around the world. He was seen as kind and unpretentious and gentle of spirit and word. Across America, special editions of magazines and newspapers were sold to commemorate his life and times, and there were all sorts of panel discussions about him on TV.
Coming from the global south, of course, he was very interested in issues of justice and peace.
Most networks, likewise, featured extensive coverage of his funeral, which was held in Rome on April 26th. Many world leaders were in attendance, including President Trump and President Zelensky of Ukraine, and they had a little chat off to the side at one point, creating what is almost certainly the most iconic photograph of the Sede Vacante era. Other photos were decidedly less celebrated, including the apparently high number of selfies that people were taking in front of the Pope's coffin. The mourning of Pope Francis was not without nuance, of course. Within the formal Catholic Church hierarchy of priests and bishops, Francis was said to be a somewhat contentious figure because he was associated with the church's more liberal wing, and he often did things, mostly small symbolic gestures, that offended conservatives and traditionalists. In the New York Times, the conservative Catholic columnist Ross Douthat said that the divisive character of Francis's reign had resulted in a weakening of the office of Pope overall, but he also noted that this could be a good thing. People aren't suddenly becoming Catholic because of things the Pope has done or said, but they also aren't rejecting Catholicism because they reject papal edicts or desire doctrinal change. Instead, the manifest weakness of Catholicism as an institution, the breakdown of lines of authority and deference, has seemingly made it easier for some people to consider Catholicism as a religion, a way of life, and to find their small doorway in. In any case, this idea of Francis as an ideologically divisive figure loomed large in the other great media trend of Sede Vacante 2025, which was endless speculation on how the race to replace him might go. Even though attempts to predict Pope elections are notoriously inaccurate, there is always a great deal of public demand for the media to treat the conclaves of cardinals that pick popes as being basically political bodies that are making a basically political decision according to political logic. Thus, media around the world obediently churned out lists of supposed papal frontrunners, sorted into liberal and conservative columns.
Peter Erdo from Hungary, maybe on the more conservative side. Luis Tagle from the Philippines, maybe more on the progressive side.
The fact that the movie Conclave had come out just a year earlier as well doubtless played a large role in the amount of speculation as well. The film portrays Vatican culture at its most devious, and there was a lot of talk during Sede Vacante 2025 about the degree that it was an accurate representation of what was likely to go down in the race to replace Francis.
This is a conclave, Aldo. It's not a war.
It is a war. And you have to commit to a side.
But let us now cast our scope outward a bit. What else defined the Sede Vacante 2025 era, other than speculation about the papacy itself? President Trump officially passed his 100th day in office on April 29th, 2025. This is a landmark moment in U.S. political culture that is traditionally treated as an opportunity to reflect on how the president has been doing so far. And I think it is safe to say that Trump mostly got bad grades on this front. Trump's 100th day came after 3 months of pretty chaotic governance, defined in large part by Trump's wild and inconsistent efforts to impose dramatic tariffs on all foreign goods imported into the United States. The struggle of American businesses to adapt to these new tariffs, coupled with the looming threat of higher prices for consumer goods, made fear of an imminent recession one of the defining themes of the sede vacante era. On social media, people were even reviving the idea of a recession core aesthetic, defined by cheap food, furniture, and fashion. Here is how the New Yorker's John Cassidy reported on the situation in an April 28th article. Practically everywhere, confusion reigns, and no wonder. The degree of chaos and uncertainty that has been unleashed upon the US economy and the world economy is unprecedented. Eswar Prasad, a Cornell University economist and former senior official at the International Monetary Fund, told me. There have been other administrations that have come to office and had to deal with instability early on, but the fact that this administration comes in and its own policies are what stoked instability is quite remarkable. On April 27th, a very damaging poll came out showing that Trump had the highest 100-day disapproval rating of any president in 80 years. In other words, he was enjoying basically none of the sort of goodwill that voters traditionally tend to give to a president when he's just starting out. And for his part, Trump did very little to make things better. A string of interviews with the president were released to coincide with his 100th day, including Time Magazine, The Atlantic, and ABC News, and all of them were widely panned as embarrassing, if not slightly incoherent.
It says MS-13.
That was Photoshop.
That was Photoshop. Terry, you can't do that.
Trump obviously still has a lot of time left in his second term, but whatever else he gets up to, the sede vacante era will definitely not be seen as a high point of his tenure. Trump's unpopularity during this era was also notable for affecting the perception of two of the most closely watched international elections of sede vacante 2025. Canada and Australia, both countries re-elected their center-left ruling parties to power for another term, following campaigns that were widely portrayed, especially in the international media, as referendums on what voters in those countries thought about their relationship, not just with Trump the man, but also Trump-style right-wing populism in general. Maybe my perspective is a little biased as a Canadian, but I definitely feel like Prime Minister Mark Carney really emerged as one of the great progressive heroes of this era, especially among liberals in the US. His whole brand as a politician was based around his ability to offer resistance to Trump, which really made him a sort of symbol that a lot of people were looking for at the time. A May 6th meeting between the two men in the Oval Office, in which Carney seemed calm and unflappable in the face of Trump's provocations, only helped him consolidate this reputation further.
We had Mark Carney coming down to meet Donald Trump in the Oval Office.
Crushed it.
And I don't know if you guys caught this,
Crushed it.
but he absolutely owned Trump.
At least two other major world leaders assumed office during sede vacante 2025. The South Korean presidency has been bouncing all over the place since the impeachment of former President Yoon Suk-yeol in December of 2024, after his failed attempt to impose martial law. On May 2nd, Korea's fourth consecutive acting president, Lee Joo-ho, came to power for complicated succession reasons I won't get into here. Given that the next Korean presidential election is set for June the 3rd, being in office during the sede vacante period, and then offering official congratulations to the new pope, might wind up being the highlights of Mr. Lee's brief presidency. 4 days later, on May the 6th, the German parliament did what was widely expected and elected Friedrich Merz to be the new chancellor. Merz's Conservative Party had won the German national election back in February, unseating the Social Democrats, but German parliamentary negotiations tend to ramble on for months before a new chancellor can be formally installed. Mirs actually failed to win a majority in the first round of voting, which was a huge embarrassment for him, as nothing like that had ever happened in the entire history of post-war German democracy. On April 23rd, there was a massacre of Indian tourists by Pakistani terrorists in the disputed Kashmir province that borders the two countries. On May 7th, India began